He walked into town with a boy and the wind still smelling like split pine, and when people squinted to see the child's face through the damp morning light, something in their stomachs tightened before they could name why. If stories like this grip you, subscribe and stay with me, because what you notice in the first look is only the beginning. The calendar in the barber's window said April 1931, but the days felt older than that. A storm had raked the county 2 nights prior, chewing shingles and snapping porch rails, then shuffled east and left everything wet and bright. In the new light, Main Street looked like it had been politely rearranged by someone who didn't care for how things had been. Roofers knelt like penitent men along eaves, women shook out rugs from stoops, a farmer's boy dragged broken limbs off the Methodist lawn with a rope around his shoulders. That's when they saw the man and the boy. The man was mid-30s maybe, brown jacket gone shiny at the elbows, hat brim softened by rain and years. He had the quiet hands of someone who'd worked other people's fields and kept his own counsel. The boy walked a half-step behind him, thin and dry-eyed, clothes clean but not new, a pale shirt tucked too neatly into trousers tied with cord. He was 8 or 9 by size, less by how he moved, more by how he didn't. They stopped first at the hardware store because that is where strangers stop when they want to be useful. The man set his hat against his chest while Mr. Holcomb wiped his spectacles with a square of linen and tried not to stare. "Name's Grant," the man said. "No hand offered yet. Looking for nails, half-pound of 10 penny if you've got it. Maybe a hammer if you deal used." Holcomb nodded, found the nails, set a bin on the counter. He scoured the back room for a hammer with a straight handle. "Storm got you north of the river?" "Got everybody," Grant said. "Figured I could trade labor for what I can't pay. Boy pulls brush as good as any." Holcomb's eyes flicked to the boy. The boy was watching the nail heads like they mattered. When he lifted his face, Holcomb felt the tiniest misstep in his own heartbeat. It wasn't anything you could swear to. The boy's eyes were the right color, a washed gray like water over slate, steady, not dull. But he didn't meet your gaze so much as place it somewhere near you and hold it there, too precisely. His mouth was a straight line that didn't rest between expressions. It simply waited, correct as a rule. "What's your name, son?" Holcomb asked. The boy's lips parted a little late, as if someone had called him from another room. "Evan," he said. The word landed correctly, not quite where you expected it. Grant counted coins, not enough of them, and Holcomb waved off the difference like it was nothing. "You fixing a roof?" "3, Grant said. "Or 4, if the light holds." They left with the nails and a second-hand hammer, and the bell over the door kept ringing in Mr. Holcomb's head longer than it should have. Out on Main, the man set the box into the boy's arms. The boy took the weight without adjusting his elbows, as if he had practiced the posture and was waiting to be told if it was right. By 10 o'clock they were on Myrtle Street, where the storm had sheared shingles clean like a barber proving a point. Grant climbed Mrs. Keene's ladder, moved with a carpenter's clarity, no wasted reach, no show. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his voice had the kind of politeness that made people straighten their shoulders. The boy stayed on the ground and stacked the good shingles from the bad in 2 tidy columns. When a plank slid, he did not flinch. When a nail bit his thumb, he tucked the hand behind his back until the hurt passed and then resumed, as if pain were a private matter belonging to the hand alone. Children gathered to look because children always do, storm or no storm. A girl with a red ribbon stared openly at the boy's face. "You got a funny way of blinking," she said. The boy looked at her, then at the sun-wet grass, then at her again, blinked once, slow, full, like a shutter closing to the end of its track. "I do?" he asked. The words matched the meaning. But the tone sat 1 inch away, like a note struck on a piano that wasn't tuned to the rest of the room. "Leave them be," Mrs. Keene called, but not unkindly. She watched, too. It was the watching that did it, eyes narrowing just the smallest bit, as if detail were hiding in plain sight. Up close, the boy's features were ordinary enough to be forgotten. Brown hair combed flat, a cowlick fighting back at the crown, an ear tipped a little, a milk tooth still not replaced. And yet there was a neatness that felt installed. Not fussy, not prissy, just the exactness of someone copying a picture very carefully, right down to where to put the shadows. At noon, Grant climbed down for water. He didn't touch the cup until the boy had drunk first. "Say thank you," Grant reminded. "Thank you," Evan said to the cup, then to Mrs. Keene, then, as if to be safe, to the floorboards of the porch. "Where you two come from?" Mrs. Keene asked, wrapping her hands in her apron as if the question might scald. "Arkansas first," Grant said. "Then wherever work held. We just walked up from Yazoo last week." "You kin to anyone here?" "No, ma'am," he answered as if all the answers had been pre-measured in a jar. He looked like a man who had learned not to speak beyond what a thing cost and what it would take to fix it. The afternoon turned bright and insect-loud. Somewhere downtown, a piano practiced scales. Grant moved to the next roof. Evan shadowed him from the yard, carrying boards alone with the concentration of a boy balancing plates. Once, when Grant called, "Hand me," Evan's face changed a fraction too late, the way a photograph lags when you turn a page. He climbed the ladder slow, the hammer held head down like a book he didn't want to drop. Grant took it without looking and said, "Good." Soft, and for a breath it was only a father and a son inside an ordinary day. By 5, the light took on that copper sheen that makes a town seem briefly rich. Grant came off the roof with his shirt stuck to his back, the good kind of ruin from honest work. He paid the boy in praise he portioned carefully, not to spoil him. "You stacked right," he said. "You minded the edges." The boy's mouth remembered how to smile. It took effort, but it held there as if he'd been told to keep it until someone said stop. They carried their tools along the edge of the square, past the diner whose screen door never sat still. Inside, men in caps watched the new pair pass with a curiosity sharpened by hunger no one admitted. Carla the waitress, who knew what everyone ate and when, pushed the door open with her hip. "Y'all worked enough to sit," she said. "I can put on a bowl." Grant touched 2 fingers to his hat brim. "We'll take coffee if you got it, and bread if it's day old." "We got new," she said, and slid a plate anyway. At the counter, a deputy from the sheriff's office, young and pink around the knuckles, studied the boy in the mirror behind the bottles. He wasn't unkind, just the sort who couldn't leave a thought unpolished. "Your boy don't talk much," he said. "He talks when there's used to," Grant said. "What's he good at?" "Listening." The deputy let that rest. After a minute, he said, "What happened to his face?" Grant set his cup down and turned, not fast. "What do you mean?" "Nothing wrong," the deputy said too quickly, already backing off his own words. "Just, he looks careful." Evan turned his head with that same measured beat, as if counting 4 in his mind before he followed the sound. He smiled again because he had been praised for it once and people liked it. Up close now, the deputy noticed the thing the others hadn't named. The boy's features were perfect the way a new coin is perfect. No hesitations, no smudges of expression in the corners. Even the freckle on his cheek looked placed, not earned. Carla refilled their cups. The bell over the door rang. Somebody laughed too loud about something that didn't matter. Outside, the last of the storm smell finally burned off and left the honest odor of dust. When they finished, Grant folded a dime and a nickel under the cup and stood. The boy rose a half-second after him, chair legs brushing the floor in unison as if they had practiced. On the street, where the light thinned toward evening, they passed the window of the photographer's shop. In the glass, the boy's reflection lagged the smallest fraction of a breath behind the man's, as if the town had to decide whether to see him at all. The night after the storm still carried the smell of wet pine and torn shingles, but the town was settling back into its rhythm. Shops stayed open later, doors propped with bricks to catch the breeze. Folks gathered outside the pharmacy, trading pieces of gossip like poker chips, and nearly every word carried the same name: the stranger, Grant, and his boy. "Quiet sort," one man said, pulling at his suspenders. "But works like a mule. Roof on Keene's place looks better than when her husband was alive." "Heard the boys off somehow," muttered another. "Face don't sit right. Can't say how, but you look long enough, you feel it." "You been drinking, Lloyd?" came the reply. Yet even as they laughed, their eyes drifted toward the far end of the street where Grant and Evan moved like a pair of shadows cutting through the last of the dusk. Grant had accepted work at the boarding house, patching walls and resetting glass panes. He never asked about wages up front. He worked, then folded whatever was given into his pocket with a nod. The boy stayed near, carrying scraps of wood or glass, arranging them with neat, deliberate care. At supper in the boarding house, the landlady, Mrs. Harrow, placed a plate in front of Evan. "Eat up, child," she said. The boy looked down at the beans and cornbread, then up at her with that faintly delayed recognition, as though the instruction had crossed a wide river before reaching him. "Thank you," he said. Voice correct, soft, neither shy nor bold. Just measured. Later, in the lamplight, a tenant whispered to Mrs. Harrow, "That boy don't blink like he should." She hushed him with a sharp look, but the thought stuck. The next morning, Evan walked to the square with Grant. The sun was already hot, burning the last puddles from the storm. Children kicked a ball near the church steps. Evan paused, ball rolling close to his feet. One boy shouted, "Kick it back." Evan bent, picked it up with both hands, and stared at the stitching as though memorizing each loop. Then, instead of kicking, he carried it to the edge of the group and placed it down carefully, almost ceremonially, before stepping back. "What's wrong with you?" the boy asked. Evan said nothing. His face shaped a smile, late, strained, like an actor waiting for a cue. The other children laughed, unsettled without knowing why. Grant called, "Evan, come along." And that was that. By the week's end, townsfolk had a rhythm with Grant. He repaired porches, lifted beams, sharpened tools in exchange for bread, tobacco, or coins. He worked steady, without complaint, his back straight even under heavy loads. But the boy, he remained the subject of whispers. One evening, Deputy Collins stopped by the boarding house. He leaned on the rail while Grant tightened hinges. "Your son don't mix much," he said casually. "Never been one for chatter," Grant answered. "School's starting again soon. You putting him in?" Grant paused, wiped his hands. "We move too much for that. He learns at home." The deputy nodded, though his eyes narrowed. Strange sort of learning, keeping a boy out of sight. Inside, Evan sat at the table, hands folded, watching the flame of the oil lamp. He didn't fidget, didn't hum, didn't glance at the door. He just sat, utterly still, until Grant returned and placed a hand on his shoulder. At that touch, the boy rose instantly, posture snapping to attention. Later that night, Mrs. Harrow went to blow out the lamps and saw something that froze her mid-step. Evan stood at the window, face close to the glass, watching the street with those gray, steady eyes. He didn't move when she entered. "You all right, child?" she asked softly. His head turned, just slow enough to be wrong. "Yes, ma'am." She left the lamp burning longer than usual after that. Sunday came, and the church bells pulled the town together. Families gathered in their best clothes, hats stiff with starch. Grant arrived with Evan in tow. Whispers followed them through the doorway. They sat near the back, Grant's hat in his lap, Evan's hands folded perfectly, eyes fixed on the pulpit. During the hymn, voices rose and fell. Evan's mouth moved, forming every word, but no sound came. The woman beside him noticed, clutched her hymnal tighter, and shifted a few inches away. After service, Reverend Porter greeted newcomers with his usual warmth. He shook Grant's hand firmly. "Welcome, friend. We're glad to have you." Grant nodded, said only, "Grateful." "And this must be your boy?" the Reverend asked, crouching a little to meet Evan's eyes. "Yes, sir," Evan answered, though the tone was flat, rehearsed. The Reverend smiled politely, but when he turned to speak to another parishioner, he rubbed the back of his neck, unsettled by the way the boy's gaze had lingered on him, unblinking. By afternoon, half the town had their stories ready. The boy never blinked. The boy never spoke first. The boy moved like a puppet tugged by invisible strings. Grant worked on, unfazed, though he must have heard. And Evan followed him always, A pale shadow with a face that was just wrong enough to keep everyone watching. By the third week after the storm, Grant had settled into the rhythm of the town as if he'd always belonged. He was on rooftops at sunrise, hammering nails while the fog still clung to the river, and in gardens by dusk, mending fences with quiet, efficient strokes. People began to trust his hands, if not his history. But the boy, they trusted him less with every passing day. At first it was only whispers. Then came stories. A seamstress swore she'd seen him on the corner near her shop long after midnight, standing motionless under the street lamp. She said his eyes caught the light wrong, too steady, too pale. A farmer claimed the boy had walked across his field without leaving footprints in the damp earth. The tale spread faster than truth ever could. In the boarding house, Mrs. Harrow kept her door locked at night. Once, passing by the hallway, she noticed Evan sitting upright in a chair at the end of the corridor. No lamp, no book, no sound, just sitting, hands folded neatly, staring at nothing. When she asked what he was doing, he answered, "Waiting." For what, he didn't say. Children avoided him now. The red-ribboned girl who had first teased him about his blinking swore he had stood outside her gate at dawn, watching the house until her father chased him off. When confronted, Evan denied nothing. He simply said, "I was looking." Grant brushed off the talk. "Children see ghosts where there are none," he told the grocer. "Boys just quiet." But the unease grew. One afternoon, Grant took on work at the old Miller place, helping to raise a collapsed shed. A group of townsmen gathered to lend a hand, hauling beams, driving nails, sweating under the weight of wood and heat. Evan was there, too, steady as ever, moving boards into piles with mechanical precision. Halfway through, one of the men dropped a plank. It struck the ground with a sharp crack, startling the others. Evan didn't flinch. Not even a blink. He simply bent, lifted the plank, and set it back in place. His face never shifted. "Boy, don't scare like a child should," one man muttered. That evening, the deputy stopped by again. He leaned against the porch rail where Grant was scraping mud from his boots. "I hear things," Collins said. "People always hear things," Grant replied without looking up. "They say your boy don't sleep," the deputy pressed. Grant's jaw tightened. "He sleeps. Then maybe he does it with his eyes open." The two men locked eyes, silence thick between them. Finally, Collins spat into the dirt and walked off, but the tension stayed, humming in the air like a live wire. Later that night, Mrs. Harrow went to check the lamps again. Through the crack of the boy's door, she saw him lying flat on the bed. His body was still, his chest rising shallow. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, unblinking. She shut the door quickly, heart thudding. The next day, the boarding house bustled with guests arriving for the market fair. Children played in the square, laughter echoing through the warm air. Evan stood at the edge, watching. Some of the boys, braver than most, called to him, "Come on, play." He stepped into their circle, awkward but willing. The game was simple, tag. At first he ran as expected, his movements stiff but quick enough. Then something shifted. When one boy lunged to tag him, Evan stopped mid-run, turned with unnatural precision, and fixed the boy with that gray, endless gaze. The boy froze, caught off guard, suddenly unable to move. "Tag him!" the others shouted. But the boy backed away instead, face pale, muttering, "I don't want to." The laughter died. Children scattered, leaving Evan standing alone in the dust. By evening, the story had reached every porch. The stranger's boy could stop a child in his tracks just by looking. Mothers pulled their children inside earlier. Fathers lingered by their doors longer, watching the street until the lamps burned low. That night, Grant worked late at the boarding house, fixing a shutter upstairs. Mrs. Harrow passed the parlor and found Evan there again, sitting perfectly still in the armchair. "Don't you want to read, child?" she asked, forcing cheer into her voice. Evan tilted his head a fraction too slowly. "I already know the words," he said. "What words?" "All of them." A shiver crawled over her arms. She shut the door without another word. The fair came and went. Grant earned respect with his steady labor, but suspicion clung to Evan like damp air that wouldn't clear. Even those who pitied the boy could not shake the sense that something in his face, in his stillness, was off. And by the time the leaves began to turn, fear had grown stronger than pity. Autumn crept in slowly, the air sharper in the mornings, the river rolling heavier with rain. By then, Grant's reputation was sealed. Hard worker, no trouble, a man who fixed more roofs than he left broken. But every conversation about him slid, sooner or later, to the boy. Evan walked the streets with the same steady pace, never skipping, never stumbling, never humming a tune like other children did. He carried himself with the silence of an adult and the precision of a soldier, and that silence gnawed at people more than any loudness could. It was Mrs. Harrow who first insisted something was wrong. She told the Reverend about finding the boy in the parlor with the lamp unlit, staring at the mantelpiece for an hour without shifting once. "It's not natural," she whispered. "Not healthy." The Reverend counseled patience, but even his voice carried doubt. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon, during the last of the harvest fair. Children swarmed around the stalls, sticky-fingered from caramel and dusted with sugar. Evan stood at the edge, eyes on the ring-toss game where boys his age shouted and shoved for turns. One of them, a broad-shouldered child named Henry, noticed him watching. "You wanna play, strange boy?" Henry jeered. Evan stepped forward. The crowd of children parted, uneasy. He picked up a ring, held it just long enough for the silence to grow uncomfortable, and then set it neatly over the peg. Perfect aim, no hesitation. The children gasped. Henry scowled. "Do it again, then." Evan did. And again. Each toss landed flawless, silent. By the fourth, Henry shoved him. Cheater. The shove should have knocked any child off balance. Evan swayed but did not stumble. His face did not flush, his hands did not clench. He simply turned his head, those slate-gray eyes locking on Henry with that same too long, too empty stare. Henry froze. The color drained from his face. For a moment, he looked as if he'd forgotten how to breathe. Then he let out a cry, high and sharp, and bolted from the game, shoving past the crowd. The fair dissolved into whispers. The boy cursed him. He put a spell. No child should look like that. By evening, parents were dragging their children away whenever Evan drew near. Grant heard it all, of course. He came home late, face shadowed, the weight of gossip hanging on him heavier than any day's labor. At supper, he said nothing. Evan sat across from him, hands folded neatly, posture perfect. "Did you frighten that boy today?" Grant asked finally. Evan's gaze lifted, slow, deliberate. "I only looked at him." Grant closed his eyes, rubbed his temple, and said no more. The next day, the deputy returned, not with questions this time but with warnings. "You can work here, Grant. Nobody denies you've earned your keep. But that boy of yours, he don't fit. Folks are uneasy. You ought to take him away before something worse happens." Grant's jaw tightened. "He's my son. He stays." The deputy shook his head. "Suit yourself. But fear's a fire. Once it starts, it don't put itself out." That night, a storm gathered again. The wind howled through the shutters, rain streaked the glass, and thunder rolled across the flat fields. Inside the boarding house, most huddled by their stoves. But Mrs. Harrow woke in the small hours to a sound she couldn't place. She crept to the hallway and found Evan standing at the window, face pressed close to the glass, lips moving soundlessly. She strained to listen, but the storm swallowed the words. His reflection wavered in the glass, and for a breath too long, it seemed not to match the movement of his body. The next day, Henry's parents arrived at the Reverend's door. Their boy had woken in the night screaming, eyes wide, claiming he'd seen Evan at the foot of his bed, staring. The Reverend tried to soothe them, but the tale spread like lightning. By Sunday, pews buzzed with fear. Grant sat rigid, hat in his lap, Evan beside him as still as ever. No one shook their hands afterward. No one met their eyes. That evening, Grant confronted Mrs. Harrow. "You been feeding the fire," he accused. "I only told what I saw," she snapped, trembling all the same. "You saw a boy at a window," Grant said, voice low, taut with anger. "That's all you saw." But she wasn't sure anymore. None of them were. And in the silence that followed, suspicion turned into something sharper, heavier. The kind that didn't stop at whispers. The kind that waited for a spark. The night the truth came was colder than the calendar allowed. The kind of chill that settled into the bones of the town and refused to leave. Doors stayed locked, shutters drawn tight. Still, eyes peered out through cracks and curtains, waiting for the stranger and his boy to pass. Grant worked late at the old courthouse, repairing beams by lantern glow. He moved steady, shoulders bowed under both the weight of wood and the weight of whispers. Evan sat nearby, perched on a step, hands folded neatly as always. He hadn't spoken all evening. When Grant finally set down his hammer, the deputy was waiting at the base of the stairs. "It can't go on," Collins said. "Folks are scared, Grant. They say the boy comes to them at night. They say he stands at their windows, doesn't blink, doesn't move." Grant's face hardened. "He's a child." Collins shook his head. "He ain't like other children. You know that. Don't make me be the one to act." Grant pulled Evan close, one hand on the boy's shoulder. "He's mine," he said. "That's all that matters." But the deputy's words weren't just his own. They belonged to the whole town now. That night, clouds covered the moon, and the street lamps burned weak. Families huddled inside, whispering prayers. At Mrs. Harrow's boarding house, the wind rattled the walls, and she swore she heard footsteps in the hall. When she opened her door, she saw Evan standing there, still, silent, watching. "Go back to bed," she whispered, but he didn't move. His eyes reflected the lamplight, gray and endless. For the first time, she felt certain he wasn't watching her at all. He was watching through her, past her, as though waiting for something else. She slammed the door and didn't open it again until dawn. The final break came 2 days later. A group of boys dared one another to follow Evan to the river. They trailed him quietly as he walked, his steps unhurried, precise. At the water's edge he stopped, staring at his own reflection. "Say something," one boy shouted. Evan tilted his head, lips parting too late, voice flat. "It doesn't look right." "What doesn't?" He pointed at the water, at the rippling shape of his face. "It doesn't move when I do." The boys bolted, screaming. By evening, the whole town knew. Grant found himself cornered outside the store that night, 3 men stepping out from the shadows, voices low but sharp. "You need to leave," one said. "That boy ain't natural. He ain't safe." Grant stood tall, fists clenched, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. "You don't know him." "We don't want to," another spat. The crowd didn't gather all at once. It swelled like a tide, neighbors stepping from porches, lanterns in hand, drawn by fear that had been building for weeks. Whispers turned to shouts, shouts to demands. "Take him away. Not in our town. Something's wrong with that boy." Evan stood at Grant's side, unflinching, eyes scanning the crowd with that same steady stare. For a heartbeat, the mob quieted, struck by the sheer stillness of him. Then Collins pushed forward, hand on his revolver. "Grant, for God's sake," he said. "Look at him." And Grant did. For the first time, he let himself look not as a father, but as a man seeing the boy through the eyes of the town. The posture too perfect. The smile too practiced. The eyes too empty, too precise. He swallowed hard. "Tell them, Evan," he whispered. "Tell them you're just a boy." Evan turned, slowly, gaze falling on Grant. His lips parted. "I am what you wanted." The words landed wrong, heavy, mechanical. The crowd gasped. Grant staggered back, face pale, breath shallow. "No," he murmured. "No, I." But the boy's stare didn't waver. He blinked once, long, deliberate, and for the first time, Grant looked afraid. The mob surged, shouts breaking into chaos. Collins drew his weapon but never fired. People scattered, doors slammed, lanterns dropped, leaving the street bathed in fractured light. When the dust cleared, Grant and the boy were gone. Their room at the boarding house stood empty, belongings left neatly behind, as if arranged by unseen hands. Some swore they saw them walking toward the river at dawn, silhouettes fading into the fog. Others claimed Evan still stood at their windows at night, face pale against the glass, eyes unblinking. The town never agreed on what he was. A child. A curse. A shadow made flesh. But none forgot the feeling when they looked too close at his face, the cold certainty that something, deep down, was off. And long after Grant and Evan vanished, that feeling stayed, clinging to the town like the smell of a storm that never truly passes.